The Bus to Houston by Martha Woodroof. My leaving home actually began by going back there, to Greensboro, North Carolina, from Mount Holyoke College, the summer of 1966. That was when my mother pretty much went off of her rocker. It wasn't really a surprise. Mother had been intermittently mentally ill for years, but since being crazy was considered unacceptable in our house, her problems hadn't been dealt with at all. Mother had issues with control, sex, and emotional intimacy, with a brain that produced too much of some chemicals and not enough of others. Her problems ran rampant and unacknowledged through my childhood, as my father was just too worn down, or didn't know how to intervene. I was 19 that summer, working as a teacher's aide in Head Start, trying to finish growing up. For this, it seemed, my lovely, erudite mother raged at me almost non-stop. When she physically attacked my boyfriend, I'd had enough. I took my earnings, $30 in cash, $200 more on my checkbook, and got on the bus to Houston. I wanted a different life, and Houston seemed as different as I could afford. A Greyhound is a honky-tonk on wheels, a rolling principality, where the driver may be king, but if you're quiet, the king doesn't care what you're up to. Riding one for 36 hours in the mid-60s was like living the lyrics of a Woody Guthrie song. There it was, Miss Prissy Prep School, and her $30, and her paperback trout novel, awash in the smell of fried chicken, dirty diapers, and increasingly unwashed people. Stared out the window and watched the South's underbelly roll by with its shacks and cotton fields, live oaks and bayous. This, finally, was my life. The 15-year-old boy beside me was on his way to Mississippi, for reasons he didn't want to talk about. Because he hadn't had the ritualized social dance drilled into him that I'd had drilled into me, he assumed people sitting next to each other on a bus were friends. So there we were, talking about our short lives as the dingy bus stations came and went. That boy was the first person I told about my mother. He seemed to think no less of me for either having such a parent or leaving her behind. But he did insist I phone home from Spartanburg, so my folks, perfect as they were, wouldn't worry more than what was avoidable. When I ran short of cash, just before he got off the bus, he lent me $10, wrote down his address, and I promised to send him the money. With no seatmate to distract me, I crossed Mississippi with my nose stuck to the window. I stayed there through Louisiana and beyond, while Trollop lay neglected in my lap. Why read when I could watch East Texas roll by? Freedom's just another word for no pretensions left to lose. I got off the bus in Houston at midnight, checked into a cheap hotel across the street. My first job was a lunch counter waitress. No one there cared that I spoke French or could discuss Paradise Lost. They just wanted their eggs. But before long, I was working as a researcher and had my own studio apartment. It was the 60s. I considered myself a person of principle and art. I occupied buildings, marched for miles, lost friends to Canada and acquaintances to war, got involved in the theater. I fell in love with Texas's weather's lack of civility, and Houston's swagger, and with tall men who wore big hats. My daughter Lizzie was born in Houston. We moved with her father to Charlottesville, Virginia when she was 5, and she and I stayed there. While she was growing up, I liked to remind her, before she ever saw Mr. Jefferson's manicured city, she'd been in a hurricane, slept backstage, and protested injustice. I'm happy and proud to say she has grown up unafraid. Leaving home the way I didn't fix either me or my life, but it did teach me that I didn't have to stay somewhere just because the future somewhere else looked murky. Something that was good to know when my first 2 marriages didn't work. God knows I've had plenty of rough patches since then. Bouts with addiction and alcoholism, my own rounds with the family disease of depression. But nothing ever made me regret getting on the Houston bus. I did my best to keep in touch with my parents, and I visited them occasionally. By the end of my mother's life, I was able to take care of her without rancour. By then, I suppose, I understood we'd both done the best we could. But I put off sending the $10 back to the boy on the Houston bus until I finally lost his address. And that I do regret.